can't bear this smell anymore. Please go.
Mark, please don't throw me away.
Mark and Sarah were the most famous couple at State University. Mark was a young man who seemed to have found a fountain of endless money. He didn't have a regular job, yet he drove the latest luxury cars and lived in a massive, beautiful mansion in the heart of the city. Sarah, a beautiful final year student, lived there with him after moving out of her school dorm. To everyone watching, they were living a dream. They went on expensive vacations to places like Dubai and South Africa. They wore designer clothes and threw massive parties that the whole campus talked about for weeks. Other girls whispered about how lucky Sarah was, believing she had won the lottery of life by finding such a wealthy boyfriend. Sarah's best friend, Emily, was the only one who felt uneasy. One afternoon, Emily pulled her aside. "Sarah," she said quietly, "please be careful. Ask questions about where this money is coming from. Mark was a regular student just like us before he suddenly became a millionaire." Sarah was insulted. She called Emily jealous and stopped talking to her completely. Deep down, Sarah knew the truth. She knew Mark was a Yahoo boy who made money through internet fraud, but she didn't care. The lifestyle was too sweet to give up. When exam time came, Sarah paid other students to write her papers while she stayed home and relaxed. Life felt perfect. But then, everything began to fall apart. Mark got into serious debt with dangerous people. Men began coming to the house, threatening him for their money. To survive, Mark started selling his cars one by one. Eventually, he had to sell his houses too. He tried to invest the little money he had left into various businesses, but every single one of them failed. They moved from the big mansion to a small, old two-bedroom apartment in a poor part of town. Mark was desperate and broken. One day, he went to see a local spiritualist in a village outside the city. When he returned, he told Sarah the man could restore his wealth, but he needed a woman's personal belongings, specifically her underwear and other intimate items. Mark explained this to Sarah without hesitation. Sarah agreed immediately. Her reasoning was simple. If Mark got rich again, she would benefit too. She didn't believe the stories about stolen destinies. She thought even if her destiny was affected, she could just live off Mark's success forever. She handed over her items without fear. The ritual was performed. Within 3 weeks, Mark started making big money again. They moved back into a nice house and he bought a new car. Everything seemed to be returning to normal. Sarah was relieved and happy. Then the smell started. It began with Mark complaining that Sarah had a terrible body odor. Sarah was confused. She bathed twice every day and used the most expensive perfumes, just like she always had. She could not smell anything wrong with herself, but Mark kept complaining day and night. The problem quickly spread outside the house. When Sarah went to the market, vendors and customers moved away from her. In church, the woman sitting next to her stood up and found another seat. On campus, her classmates wrinkled their noses and whispered when she walked past. Even strangers on the street turned their faces away in disgust. Sarah scrubbed her body until her skin was raw and painful. She bought every soap, cream, and perfume she could find. Nothing worked. The smell, which only others could perceive, grew worse each day. Mark could barely look at her anymore. One evening, He lost his temper, packed her bags, and told her to leave. She begged and cried on her knees, but he pushed her out of the house and locked the gate. Sarah dragged her heavy luggage through the streets. She went first to the friends she used to party with, the ones who had cheered her on when she was living in the mansion. When she knocked on their door, they opened it with smiles that quickly turned to horror. They covered their noses and told her to leave immediately. One of them actually gagged and ran inside. They shut the door in her face. These were the same girls who had eaten her food and worn her clothes. She thought about going home to her parents in Springfield, but the shame was too much. What would she tell them? That she lived with a man instead of in the dorms? That she cheated on her exams? That she gave her underwear to a spiritualist? She spent the little money she had left on cheap hotels until they also told her to leave because of the smell. Emily was her last option. When Emily opened the door, she had already heard the rumors, but the actual smell was overwhelming. It was not a normal smell of sweat. It was something rotten and unnatural coming from Sarah's very core. Sarah collapsed on the floor and cried until she had no more tears. She apologized over and over for how she had treated Emily. Emily sat with her, opening all the windows so she could breathe. She told Sarah that no soap would fix this because the problem was spiritual. She insisted that Sarah had to go home and tell her parents everything. Sarah was terrified they would disown her, but Emily promised to go with her for protection. The bus ride to her parents' house was a nightmare. Passengers complained that there must be a dead animal in the vehicle. The driver stopped twice to check the engine and the tires, thinking something was rotting inside. Sarah sat by the window crying silently while people pointed at her. When they arrived home, her parents came out to welcome them, but immediately staggered back, covering their noses. Sarah fell to her knees in the dirt and confessed everything Mark, the ritual, the underwear, and the fake life she had been leading. Her father's hand flew up to slap her in anger, but Emily stepped in between them, begging him to focus on a solution instead of punishment. The next day, Sarah's parents and Emily travelled back to the city to confront Mark. Sarah stayed behind because she was too ashamed to be seen. They found Mark in a nice new duplex. When he saw them, he showed no remorse. Sarah's father demanded that he reverse the ritual. Mark laughed. He said he didn't force Sarah to do anything. He admitted that when he told her what the spiritualist needed, he actually expected her to say no. He was surprised at how quickly and willingly she handed over her items just to stay rich. He told them it couldn't be undone and ordered them to leave his house. The family left feeling hopeless. They tried different healers, but many were scammers who took their money and failed to help. The smell remained. Sarah stopped eating and grew thin, her eyes becoming hollow with despair. Finally, Emily suggested her own church. They travelled to the city and met a pastor. After hearing the story, the pastor told Sarah that the ritual had traded her spiritual glory for Mark's money. He said the smell was a sign of spiritual decay. He warned them it would take serious prayer and fasting to break the curse. For 3 weeks, Sarah and her family lived at the church. They fasted for days, drinking only water. The church members prayed over her for hours every morning and evening. Slowly, the smell began to fade. By the end of the 3rd week, the odor was completely gone. Sarah hugged Emily and cried tears of pure joy. But as Sarah was being healed, Mark's life was falling apart again. His money disappeared, his businesses failed, and his landlord threw him out. Within 2 months, Mark was poor again. He heard that Sarah had been healed and showed up at her parents' gate, looking rough and wearing old clothes. He begged for her to come back to him. Sarah looked at him and felt only pity. She told him she forgave him, but only so she could move on with her own life. She told him it was over. She closed the gate and walked away, leaving him standing there alone. Sarah had missed a whole semester, but she went back to school, moved into the dorms, and focused on her studies. Emily remained her constant support. People still whispered, but Sarah didn't care. She studied hard, wrote her own exams, and graduated with her dignity. Be careful what you are willing to trade for money. You may not be as lucky as Sarah.